We didn't realize anything was wrong until we reviewed the footage hours later. During the investigation, nothing happened that felt immediately threatening or out of control. There was no panic, no running, no moment where we believed we were in danger. It wasn't until we were safely home, replaying the recordings frame by frame, that we noticed something none of us had seen at the time. A dark shape appeared behind me in a hallway where no one should have been standing, and it remained visible for several seconds before disappearing. By then, whatever it was had already had hours alone with our equipment, our voices, and possibly more than that. That discovery is the reason this investigation matters. The decision to investigate the building was not made lightly, nor was it based on rumors alone. The location had been discussed for years among urban explorers, former security personnel, and several independent paranormal research groups. What made it unusual was not only the number of reported incidents, but also how consistent those reports were despite coming from people who had never met each other. Many of the descriptions overlapped in very specific ways, particularly regarding unexplained sounds, visual sightings, and equipment malfunctions. The structure itself was a former medical facility constructed in the late 1940s and expanded several times throughout the following decades. It served various purposes over the years, including long-term patient care and later psychiatric treatment. Official records stated that the building was permanently closed in the early 1990s due to safety concerns and high maintenance costs. Internally, however, several documents referenced unresolved incidents and repeated staff complaints during the final years of operation. After the closure, the building remained unused. Attempts to renovate or demolish it were delayed multiple times, and eventually the property was fenced off and left to deteriorate. Over the years, trespassers occasionally entered the building, but most did not stay long. Some reported hearing voices when no one else was present. Others claimed to see movement in rooms that were otherwise empty. A small number of former security guards publicly stated that they refused to patrol the interior at night after experiencing unexplained events. Our group consisted of 4 people. I was responsible for documenting the investigation and later reviewing all recorded material. Mark handled the majority of the technical equipment, including EMF meters, spirit box devices, and environmental sensors. Alex operated the primary camera and was in charge of visual documentation. Daniel assisted with lighting, navigation, and backup audio recording. None of us claimed to have paranormal abilities, and none of us approached the investigation with any expectation of a specific outcome. We arrived at the location shortly after sunset. The building stood isolated on the outskirts of a small town, surrounded by overgrown vegetation and partially collapsed fencing. Most of the windows were shattered, and large sections of the roof showed visible damage. Faded warning signs were still attached to the exterior walls, though many were unreadable. There was no active electricity connected to the structure, and no nearby buildings that could reasonably account for reported lights or sounds. Before entering, we conducted a full equipment check. We placed a static camera outside the main entrance facing inward to record any movement near the doorway. All cameras were synchronized at the same time. Battery levels were verified, audio recorders were tested, and baseline EMF readings were recorded. Everything registered within normal environmental ranges. There was no noticeable wind, no rainfall, and no external noise beyond distant traffic. At 9:14 p.m. we entered the building through a partially boarded entrance on the ground floor. The interior air was stale and heavy, carrying the smell of dust, mold, and long-term abandonment. The first floor consisted mainly of long corridors lined with former patient rooms, administrative offices, and storage areas. Much of the furniture had been removed over the years, but metal bed frames, cabinets, and carts remained scattered throughout the building. Despite the broken windows, the air inside felt unmoving, as if the structure were sealed off from the outside environment. For the first 20 minutes, we conducted a slow and methodical walkthrough of the ground floor. Each room was briefly documented, and ambient audio was recorded at several points. EMF readings remained mostly stable, with only minor fluctuations that could be attributed to environmental interference or metal objects within the walls. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred during this initial period. At 9:37 p.m., Mark noticed a sudden EMF spike near what appeared to be an old nurse station located at the center of the floor. The reading jumped sharply from baseline to a significantly elevated level and then dropped back down within seconds. There were no visible power sources nearby, and the walls showed no exposed wiring. The breaker room for that section of the building had been stripped years earlier. We documented the reading, photographed the area, and recorded the time. Shortly afterward, we placed a digital audio recorder on a metal desk inside a former examination room. The room was empty and isolated from the main corridor. We left it undisturbed for 10 minutes to capture ambient sound. When we returned, the recorder was still running, and nothing in the room appeared to have moved. At 9:56 p.m., we decided to attempt direct communication using a spirit box. We chose a small patient room with limited exposure to outside noise. The windows were broken, but partially blocked by debris, reducing airflow and sound interference. Mark activated the spirit box, allowing it to scan through radio frequencies continuously. We agreed beforehand to ask clear, direct questions and allow several seconds of silence between each one. "Is anyone here with us right now?" Mark asked. The device produced only static. "Can you tell us how many are here?" he continued. After several seconds of scanning, a single word came through clearly. 4. The response matched the number of people present in the room. We did not comment verbally and continued with the session. "Are you aware that we're inside this building?" Mark asked. There was a pause, followed by a brief response. "Yes." We continued with controlled questioning for several minutes. Some responses were unclear or inconsistent, but several appeared contextually relevant. At one point, Alex asked whether whoever was communicating wanted us to leave the building. The response came almost immediately. "Not yet." At 10:02 p.m., we moved toward the stairwell leading to the second floor. As we approached, Daniel pointed out something on the steps. Faint footprints were visible in the dust, moving both up and down the staircase. They were not sharply defined, but they were clearly human in shape. No recent activity at the site had been reported that evening. The second floor was noticeably darker than the first. Several hallways had partially collapsed ceilings, and debris covered much of the floor. The layout was more open, with fewer intact rooms. We placed a static camera at the end of the main corridor, aimed down a long hallway that extended nearly the entire length of the floor. At 10:19 p.m., while filming inside what appeared to be a former operating room, Alex stopped moving and adjusted his camera toward the hallway. He stated that something was visible at the far end of the corridor. Initially, it appeared to be a shadow partially blocking the doorway. However, when the camera light illuminated the area, the shape did not react or fade. I moved beside Alex and observed the same shape. It stood upright and appeared darker than the surrounding darkness. No facial features, clothing, or reflective surfaces were visible. The outline remained consistent and well-defined, yet it did not behave like a normal shadow. After several seconds, the shape moved. The movement was not a step or a walk. Instead, it shifted laterally and disappeared into a nearby doorway without producing any sound. There were no footsteps, no disturbance of dust, and no movement of debris. We documented the time and location immediately. At 10:31 p.m., Mark reviewed the feed from the static hallway camera. The footage showed a brief distortion across the frame accompanied by a noticeable drop in light levels at the exact time the figure was observed. Although the camera did not capture a clear image of the shape itself, the timing aligned precisely with our visual observation. We continued further into the second floor to conduct additional documentation. In a larger room believed to have been used for group therapy sessions, we placed 3 devices on the floor: an EMF meter, a digital audio recorder, and the spirit box. Mark resumed questioning while the rest of us remained silent and stationary. "Did we see you in the hallway earlier?" he asked. After several seconds of static, a response came through. "Yes." "Can you describe what you look like?" Mark continued. The spirit box paused briefly before producing a low, distorted word. "Dark." Immediately after the response, The EMF meter spiked sharply and remained elevated for approximately 15 seconds before returning to baseline. During this time, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. No air movement or external cause could be identified. At 10:54 p.m. we heard footsteps above us. The third floor was known to be structurally unstable, and we had decided in advance not to enter it. The footsteps sounded heavy and deliberate, moving slowly from one end of the building to the other. The sound continued for nearly a full minute before stopping directly above our position. No debris fell. No dust was disturbed. The sound ended abruptly. At 11:03 p.m. Daniel reported that his flashlight had begun flickering despite having fresh batteries installed before entering the building. Moments later, Mark's EMF meter shut off completely and would not power back on. Multiple attempts to restart it were unsuccessful. At that point, we agreed to conclude the investigation and return to the ground floor. As we moved toward the stairwell, Alex stopped and lowered his camera slightly. He stated that something was visible behind me in the hallway. I turned slowly and observed the same dark figure seen earlier, now positioned closer than before. The outline remained consistent, and the surrounding area appeared dimmer than the rest of the corridor. Within seconds, the temperature dropped rapidly, and condensation became visible in our breath. The figure then began to move toward us. The distance between us shortened without any visible stepping motion. It did not accelerate or change shape. It simply moved closer. We exited the second floor in an organized manner without running. Once we reached the first floor, the temperature returned to normal levels, and Mark's EMF meter powered back on without explanation. All other equipment resumed normal function. We exited the building at 11:21 p.m. Later that night, during a detailed review of the footage, we noticed something none of us had observed during the investigation. In a clip recorded in the second-floor hallway, a dark shape appears directly behind me for less than 2 seconds before vanishing. No one reacted at the time, and no audio cue accompanied the visual anomaly. We never returned to that building. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share yours in the comments. Maybe we'll tell it in the next video. Bye.